You are listening to episode 15 of the Beyond Unreal podcast. I am the White Dragon.
And this is Sir Briz.
So first of all, next week, the podcast may not come out on Sunday night like it usually does. So Briz is going to be in Hawaii, and I'm going to be at Epic headquarters. So I am going to bring my microphone with me, so hopefully I'll be able to do an episode with some of the other guys that are coming. But I don't really know what's going to happen, so I can't make any promises. But it probably won't come out on Sunday night, because I'll be flying.
Yep.
So let's go into the changes.
Okay, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of weapon changes specifically.
So one of the changes that was made this week, and especially today, Pete implemented stepped frame rate smoothing, which basically what this does is it smooths out your frame rate within certain grades of frames per second so that your mouse movements feel more accurate to the screen. In other words, when you move your mouse, what reflects on the screen hopefully will match. And the stepped frame rate smoothing is intended to help make that feel better.
Playing around with it a little bit, it seems to work. But I personally didn't have many problems with the mouse accuracy anyways.
Yeah, it seemed more like an issue in lower frame rates. If you were able to get over 60 frames per second or so, it was
over 80 really.
You could. There were people that could tell it was happening still, but for me, once I could get over 70 or 80 frames per second, it was almost impossible to tell. But that's me. There definitely were other people that were able to tell that something weird was going on, and I have to give props to Pete Nepley because he's done a really great job of working with those guys that were having mouse issues and figuring out what the problems were and actually fixing the problems that were happening.
And going back to the thread over and over again, because it would have been really easy to just say, well, those guys don't know what they're talking about or they're just imagining things, but he's investigated almost everything that they've said in that thread.
Yeah, and he has just been communicating with them on a daily basis, it seems like, about his progress and the issues that they're raising about various things to try to get these issues fixed, and it really has made a difference, I think.
Yep. Enforcer, they changed the Enforcer damage twice. So first they changed it to 25, and a couple of people thought that that was too much, so then they toned it back a little bit, and it is currently 22. So 5 shots to kill somebody with the Enforcer.
Yep.
And it's a little bit better. One of the problems that I really have in this game right now is I feel like when I spawn, I'm just completely useless. The Enforcer is not very useful, and then you have to pick up a weapon and switch to that weapon, which takes a lot of time, and in a free-for-all, it's terrible.
So they did make another change to the Enforcer this week, which was to the Enforcer spread. So the spread now, if you look at it, depending on your range, this is on the alternate fire, the spread is a lot tighter. So it's actually easier, not easy, but easier to hit somebody with all 3 bullets of the alternate fire than it used to be. And that actually does make a pretty significant change. Now, when they had the damage up to 25, I could see that causing a problem because 3 shots at 25, you're 3/4 of the way dead. 3 shots at 22, you're at 44 health. That's a significant difference. So I think that it's better than it used to be, but one of my problems with the Enforcer is the similarity to the UT3 Enforcer, and I'm guessing that this Enforcer will have the same problem that the UT3 Enforcer had, which was that the Enforcer by itself was only okay-ish as a starting weapon, but the dual Enforcers were probably the most overpowered weapon combination in the game. I mean, you could... So in UT3 there was an Agony remake, and on that Agony remake there was an Enforcer, and that was the most hunted weapon in that level. I mean, if you could get that gun, you could easily go on a killing spree in that map. It was insane. I kind of feel like the Enforcer that we've got in the game right now is leaning that way. I don't know if it's exactly the way the UT3 one was in those
Well, it's
in
a
those
lot
terms,
less powerful than the Enforcer in UT99 or UT3. I mean, I think those were both 25 damage.
Yeah. But the spread on the one in the UT3 one was much wider. It was more like it used to be on the Enforcer. With it being tighter and a little bit lower damage, that actually I think is an improvement. but I could still see how dual enforcers would just be ridiculously overpowered at the current settings. And since we don't have double enforcers in the game right now, we can't really test that.
Yeah. You know, it's always bothered me that when you spawn, you're pretty much helpless. I mean, I don't think that you should be deadly when you just spawned, but you shouldn't be defenseless either. You should be able to put up enough of a fight that whoever's coming after you is going to want to go behind a corner and not directly engage you enough so that you can go and actually get another weapon and have stand a chance.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in UT, the enforcer was actually fairly powerful enough that...
Oh, if you were good with it, if you had aim, and this really didn't happen until the later times when there was like ping compensation and low pings and stuff, but when you got to that point, it was pinpoint accurate, 4 shots. Oh, it was... you could do damage.
The thing that's interesting is that in UT 2004, the TDM community made a assault rifle mod that removed all the grenades except for one from the assault rifle. It was like this hugely controversial change, but it seemed like the entire TDM community embraced it, and it was played within leagues. They were, I guess, trying to reduce the usefulness, even though the assault rifle was one of the most worthless starting weapons.
Oh yeah, no, I remember playing TAM, and at the beginning of a TAM match, everybody would would fire their grenades towards where the enemy spawned.
Yeah,
and now we just do it with the bio rifle. But all right, so moving on, the shock primary has been increased to 40 damage per shot.
Yay.
Yes. So you can kill somebody in 3 shots now, and it is so much better.
Now, the knockback on the shock primary is still pretty high, so that might have to be changed. I don't know. The one nice thing with the way that it is right now is that it pushes you enough that it's not, like, freezing you. The problem with the shock rifle in 2K4 was if you got hit with it, you were basically locked in position, and it was pretty easy to just ping you 2 more times and take you down with it. So I do think it's better than the 2K4 shock rifle, but all I'm saying is that's something that may need to be addressed in the future as people learn how this weapon works.
Mm-hmm. I think that you got to keep overall accuracy rates in mind, right? Reasonably good player is going to hit around 30%, right? Once you get over 30%, I consider you to be really good. And the reason why I say 30% is because that's what I hit.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of really good players that are hitting 45, 50. Anyways, so for me, that means that to kill somebody with the shock rifle, it could take me up to 10 shots. When it was 4 shots, took forever. It was almost useless. So this is going to be a big change. It will be interesting to see how it turns out. Although, we do know, because that was what it was in past games, it was 3 shots. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's good at 3 shots. Again, the issue for me will be if it's easy to get those second 2 shots.
The follow-up shots.
Yeah, the easier that it is, the more things need to change. But like I say, if you're in the air and you get hit with a shock rifle right now, I think that it pushes you hard enough that it's probably not a huge deal. But because it's reduced from 4 to 3 shots, that is something to factor in when we're talking about damage changes and stuff like that.
Yep. Okay, so another one, and this was probably the most requested thing, was they fixed the Flak secondary.
Yeah, finally. Yay! Finally.
So they did make it faster. I said a couple of times that I thought it was kind of slow. So they did make it faster, but they also changed how gravity affects it and the trajectory and things like that.
Yeah. It still feels a little bit different from previous games, and I don't know what to put it on. If you dodge forward and right when you shoot the Flak alternate, you still kind of catch up to it.
Yeah, you can still kill yourself with it.
Yeah, so it is still... I won't say that behavior is wrong. Maybe that's the way that the gun should work. All I'm saying is that it makes it feel a little bit different from previous games, whatever the cause of that is. I can't pin it to something
specific. You could certainly kill yourself with the Flak cannon in previous games. I'd also note you could shock combo yourself in previous games, and you cannot shock combo yourself in UT3 right now.
Yeah, the shock ball too.
The shock ball is too fast. Yeah.
Which is interesting because you used to be able to kill yourself with the shock rifle, and somebody made a video that was basically, this has to be in the
Every
new
UT game,
and showed himself basically killing himself with a combo on deck in every single game, and that was pretty funny.
And I don't know what to do about that, because that might mean that they have to change the refire time on it, and then there could be consequences from that. So it feels a lot better though. The Flak.
It does. It feels much better, and it feels like it's shooting more where you're aiming. And I think last week we talked about how they had implemented it if you aimed up higher, the arc was higher and stuff like that. That seems to have been toned down a little bit. They adjusted the overall vertical height of the arc, and it seems like it's much more close together. So that issue that we talked about last week where it's hard to tell where the arc will change seems to be a lot more minimized.
You can actually hit people in the heat of combat with it now.
Yeah.
So it's a lot better. Rocket splash damage reduction. So it's really subtle, but it makes a big difference.
Well, and it's not really subtle. The self-damage is not really subtle.
You can still kill yourself with it.
You can still kill yourself with it, but before with the rocket launcher, I would load up 3 rockets, 3 horizontal rockets, not spiral, and just barely clip the edge of a corner, and it would blow up in my face and kill me every single time. I tried that with the rocket launcher after this change, and it maybe took off 20 to 30 health.
Right.
It was really low. And to me, that's a huge improvement because I won't call myself deft with the rocket launcher, and it makes it so that there's a little bit of room for error for people like me.
You can still hurt yourself with it, just not as much. And that's like, it's just one step down on the splash damage.
And it actually makes rocket jumping possible, which is something that they've said they want to allow. Before, you were
you can do some crazy things with rocket jumping right now, yeah. But the other thing is attacking other people. You have to be much more accurate with it now.
Yeah, like we were talking about, I think last week, how there's a lot of narrow corridors, and that made it easy to get splash hit on people. This makes it so that you have to be quite a bit more accurate in those narrow corridors. It's not like you can hit a wall on the opposite side of them and you're going to do a ton of damage to them. You actually have to be fairly close to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can go into the game and you can like shoot the rocket at your own feet and see how close you can get before it'll actually start to hurt you. But we're probably going to need a week or two to really see how this affects things and see where it needs to go from here. Probably with a lot of these changes to the weapons.
Yeah.
They reduced the impact hammer range.
Yes.
So this one is actually quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, before you could basically nail somebody with the impact hammer from pretty far away and completely kill them.
Well, relatively speaking, right?
Yeah, relatively speaking.
People would kill you with the impact hammer before you would expect them to.
Yeah.
You'd always think, oh, I have another half second left, and no.
The way that it was before, it was a lot more forgiving online, that's what I'll say. The reason why so many people were so successful with it online was that you didn't have to be terribly accurate with it. It had such a large range that you could just be in the right vicinity and still take somebody out completely. So another change that they made to it this week, the impact hammer this week, was they made it so that it won't automatically fire unless it's charged all the way up first. So before, if you had it partially charged up and you bumped into somebody, it would discharge and hurt them and bump them away from you. Now that doesn't happen automatically. You can still do it if you let go of the button when somebody's close to you, but in order for it to activate automatically, you have to be fully charged, which is actually a pretty significant change. In previous games, it worked like the way it did before, where if, regardless of how much it was charged up, if you bumped into somebody, it would discharge. And now you have to charge it all the way up first before that will work.
Mm-hmm. So the reason why I think that this change is interesting is that when they changed it, the range was so small that you couldn't impact hammer jump with it anymore.
Yeah.
So they had to change it so that when you were attacking other people, the range was smaller than when you were trying to do the impact hammer jump.
Yeah, they made it so that if you were aiming down, basically, you had a larger range.
Which
it's still funny because even with that change, it still feels like aiming down, shooting the impact hammer doesn't have enough range for a real impact hammer jump.
Appears to me that the reason they did this, they made this change in the first place, was because people were complaining that when you're sprinting with the impact hammer, it's really, really annoying to have people do that to you. And so they reduced the range, and that range is smaller than it's been in past games, because this was never, at least to my knowledge, a problem where you couldn't impact hammer jump because of the range.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I mean, it was something that several people brought up, and I think Satan's father made a post about on the forums about people sprinting with the impact hammer is really annoying.
Yeah, that was his thread, yeah.
From the things that I've seen play testing on the servers and discussing the impact hammer on IRC, was that the people that were using the impact hammer were also finding it annoying but they were just exploiting it because it was so effective.
It's annoying.
It's annoying.
I don't get killed by it. In fact, you'll see in the videos quite a bit where somebody will come after me with the impact hammer, and I'll just completely stop and wait for them to get close and then flak them or whatever it is.
Well, and in a one-on-one situation with somebody doing this, it's not that challenging, right? Because you hear the impact hammer coming, you see them running towards you.
You can just turn around and sprint yourself, and then they're never going to catch it.
It's obvious what's going to happen, but on the flip side of that, when you're in a fairly packed server, I mean, if there's more than 8 people playing on the maps that we have right now, it's not that uncommon for you to be in a firefight with a couple of different people and then have somebody with the impact hammer come sprinting through and just blast all 3 of those people away and run off gallivanting towards the next unsuspecting group of people that do the same thing too.
I really don't get killed by it, but you have to avoid it still, and that's annoying.
And you have
because I want to go and kill real players that are actually a threat and are using real weapons and
tactics too.
Yeah, and tactics, and are actually playing the game, and dealing with all of these morons running around with impact hammers is kind of annoying.
Well, and let's be honest, when the servers were packed, when there was 16 people on every server, half of the people in the server resorted to impact hammer either because they didn't want to play really, or just because it was flat out effective. They won several games simply by using the impact hammer. In the face of that, I think the range change is appropriate, but my question is, changing that really the problem?
Yep. One last weapon change that we want to talk about is the Translocator. So this is not something that it was included in the build that they put out on Friday. They did what they did last week, where they put the build out, and then immediately after that, they made a pretty significant change.
Yeah.
Basically, it's supposed to be easier to telefrag people, although we went and tested it against, just a bot that was just standing still, and it's still pretty darn hard to kill somebody with it.
Yeah, and based on the commit for this one, it seems like, from reading it, seems like what they were trying to do is make it so that if your collision overlapped, they were trying to be more forgiving on when your collision overlapped. I think that if someone's running over the disc, it's probably easier to telefrag them than it used to be. The way that it was before, they pretty much had to be standing right on top of the disc to get the telefrag. Against the standing still bots, we were able to get telefrags. It was just incredibly difficult to find the right position to get the telefrags. So I think they did make it easier in terms of somebody's running over the disc, but I don't necessarily know if they made it easier for if the disc bounces off somebody or something like that.
It's still super, super hard.
Yeah.
Yep. So one thing, they've started to stick some menus in there. So when you come in right now, you basically get like the U window screen, and if you want to go into a match, you have to go and actually start a new match. Yeah. Which is cool, which is nice, because now I can pick what map I want to without pulling up the console and everything.
Yep.
But it seems like every person that when they come in there, they're like, what the heck? I can't get into anything. You have to press escape first.
Yeah. Well, because everyone's been used to using the console to do everything, and you can't get into the console from the menu right now. It is nice because you can jump into the game, and I think it's probably more obvious for people who haven't been messing with the game so far.
Yeah.
But in terms of all the people that have been using it for a while, it's kind of like, where's my console? I need my console back. So when we were trying to go into the racetrack earlier, we noticed that it was a little bit more difficult to get to the racetrack because it doesn't show up in any of the map lists.
Yeah, and then you can't pull the console when you want to.
So basically you have to go into a map and then you can pull up the console and then you can switch to the racetrack map. But that was something that was just funny about the menus.
But the thing is that Joe Wilcox has been making a lot of changes on the menu. In fact, he's even started to do stuff in regards to a server browser. So these are all things that I wouldn't worry about too much. Another thing that's really nice is you can actually set your key bindings.
Yeah, thank you, Timmy.
Thank you, Timmy. Note that there is at least one bug with it where setting your translocator key binding in that menu doesn't work. And in order to fix it, you have to go into the INI files and delete the one line for the translocator, and then it will work. But I already talked to Timmy about it, and he was aware of it and made a fix. It looks like he just didn't expose that particular property correctly.
Yeah.
Another thing is they did a bunch of changes to lifts. So if you're a map maker and you want a lift, it's a lot easier to put a lift in there now.
Yeah.
You get caught on them a lot less often.
Yeah. And this is something that they talked about in the last stream. They actually have a lift blueprint that they recommend everyone use. And if they want to adjust settings of the lift, that they should create a blueprint off of that blueprint, because that's the blueprint where they're making all of the changes to the lifts. And they fixed a whole bunch of stuff which had to do with colliding with the lifts. Like online, people were complaining like crazy all the time. I heard complaints about people falling through lifts or getting on lifts and it's jittery or whatever the problems were. A lot of those problems were solved by these lift fixes because they changed the way that the collision works and the way that they go up and down. Like if you jump off a lift, what happens with the lift and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of bugs in there, and they seemed to clean a lot of them up.
So I noticed in my playtesting today that it's a lot easier to do the dodge off of a lift, for instance. So, okay, so one last change that we want to talk about. So they did make a change. I made a thread calling it the walking free look. A lot of people have been lovingly calling it owl mode. Which basically what would happen is if you hold shift or whatever key you have bound to roll, your character will continue to walk in the direction that they were, as long as you hold the shift key. And you can even move your mouse around, and it's like you're free looking. You'll continue walking in that direction, and moving your mouse around doesn't affect your trajectory.
Yep.
So we spent most of the week trying to figure out what the deal with it was. And Steve Poolish came out today and told us that it was actually in there for debugging, which makes sense because if you look in the commit notes, there's actually a console command to turn it on and off. I don't know why it's on by default, but so anybody that saw that, just want to make it clear that Steve has said that it's just for debugging and it's not actually a gameplay mechanic. Although I do very much love owl mode as a... I hope something about that makes it into the game, because that post, who was it? Whoever made that post in that thread with the owl, that was probably the funniest thing I've seen on the forum so far.
Yeah.
We also want to talk about the single tap dodge. So when they stuck this in, we didn't really discuss it as fully as we should. And now that we understand a lot more about it, I think that it needs to be talked about because it's really powerful. I don't think everybody realizes how big of a change it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface everything that we're going to say with saying that I don't necessarily think that single tap dodge is bad. It actually makes the game feel a lot more fluid. It makes a lot of moves easier, and it definitely has fun value to it. So I would not argue that they should take single tap dodge out necessarily. So just to clarify what this mechanic is, you can have a key bound that makes it so that you can tap that key while you're running and it will cause you to dodge. So if you're running straight forward and you tap the single tap dodge key, which by default I believe is V,
yep,
you'll dodge forward. You'll dodge in the direction you're going. And that's definitely one benefit to single tap dodge, is you can actually now dodge in a direction you're going. If you're running backwards and you need to dodge backwards, just hit the key. What I've done with it is I bound it to the thumb button on my mouse. And in my opinion, with it being on the thumb button on my mouse, I can execute it at any time.
Yep.
And absolutely increases the fluidity of the game. And that's something that I really like about it. I wouldn't say that there's not any downsides to it, but to me the downsides are more about your preferences toward double tap dodge, which is double tapping the direction that you want to dodge in.
I think this is probably the most significant gameplay change of UT4 so far. Most of the other movement mechanics that we've had put in there are things that some people might use if they have a preference for it, but I personally haven't found terribly useful. This is terribly useful. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, it allows you to dodge faster because you don't have to press the button twice. You just press this other button 1 time and you will dodge.
Yep.
And that alone makes a big difference. But the other thing is that you can do dodges with it that you normally can't do.
Yep.
With double tap dodge, if you are moving forward and you want to dodge forward, with double tap, you have to stop pressing forward and then double tap it. And that takes a lot of time. So much time, in fact, that players never dodge in the direction that they're always going. Yep. That's why what you'll see them do is they'll move their view 45 degrees and then they will dodge by side strafing so that when I dodge, I actually end up going in that same trajectory that I was walking, and then I switch my view back over. And you see people do this all the time, right?
Yep.
It's a big, huge part of the game. And like when you're trying to dodge a rocket, you kind of have to look away from where you're going or where the enemy is sometimes so that you can dodge in the correct direction.
Yep.
With the dodge button, you don't have to do that.
Yep.
You can, if I'm going in the direction that I already wanted to do to evade their rocket, I just press the button and it's done and over with.
Yep.
And this gives so much power. It completely changes the way that you move and dodge.
Yep.
Fundamentally changes it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been saying that this doesn't do away with double tap, that it's not superior necessarily, that it's equal pretty much.
Well, the funny thing about it is that you can still use the double tap together with
if
it.
If you ever feel like you need to, there's the double tap available to you.
It's not like you can only do one or the other. You can have them both on at the same time.
Yep, exactly. And the thing is, it really is superior in almost every way. The time to dodge is a lot shorter. Being able to dodge in any direction at any time is a huge benefit. I mean, there's things like in previous UT games, it requires a ton of dexterity to dodge effectively, let's say. But especially in situations where you're moving right and you decide you want to dodge left, or you're dodging right and you decide you want to dodge left. With a single tap dodge, that's not an issue. The dexterity is entirely based in switching from pressing one button to switching to press the other one. Whereas before it was double tapping one, double tapping the other, or holding one and then double tapping the other. There was a lot more dexterity involved in dodging in previous UT games, and this almost entirely removes dexterity from the dodging equation.
Oh yeah, and especially when you can put them on different hands.
Exactly, yeah. The fact that you can put this on your thumb button, to me, that's like completely changes the way you dodge. It's so natural, I have to say. Like, it feels like it was meant to be that way. I think the exact opposite. I think having used the regular dodge for 14 years now, it feels like a hack. I feel like I'm cheating when I do it. I don't think that everybody else in the servers have figured out how to do this, because based on the movement, I still see people changing their view and everything like that. Yep.
I feel like I'm cheating because I know something they don't.
Yep. It totally feels like that. But once people realize how powerful this is, and maybe we'll make a video to help illustrate how single tap dodge is better than double tap. But once people figure out how much better this mechanic is than double tapping, nobody's going to use double tap primarily for dodging anymore. There's just no reason to.
Everybody's going to have that key bound somewhere and use it.
And so for criticisms of this, I would say my personal criticisms of it have a lot to do with being used to double tap. Like, I feel like it removes a bit of skill from the game. I do think that it makes dodging fundamentally different from previous games, but what I will say is, if the goal of single tap dodge was to make the game feel more fluid and effectively replace double tap dodging as the preferred method of dodging, I think it's a good change. one thing that I'll say about single tap dodge, it really exposes the length of time between dodges. The dodge reset time, it feels flat out like an eternity before you can dodge again because you can dodge so fast.
There's definitely some gameplay implications, and I would hope that more people start to use this mechanic so that we can see what the actual effects of it are. Because maybe it turns out that this makes dodge OP. It makes it so easy to dodge things now that it's almost impossible to hit anybody with projectile weapons.
Yeah.
That could happen. I'm a little concerned because I feel like this is really Pandora's box. Once you open it up, you can't close it again.
Yeah.
Because everybody's going to like it too much.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I say, it's superior in almost every way.
Yep.
And it makes the game feel completely more fluid. And that's something I really like about it. I don't hate single tap dodge. I think that it could be a good mechanic. The issue that I have right now is that it seems like it was added because of a specific use case, controllers, and I don't feel like the actual gameplay implications of having a single tap dodge were considered in that. Does that mean that won't happen in the future? No. But it would be nice for other people to start actively using this mechanic so that we can start saying, here's some real concerns with the way that it's implemented right now.
Yep, exactly. All right, well, I think that's everything we have for this week, yeah? As always, like and subscribe to our channel. If you have something that you want us to discuss, contact us directly. I also want to give a shout out to our IRC channel. So there's been a lot of good discussion, especially past week or so. We've kind of ironed out a couple of bugs in the system, but I love talking to you guys. Continue telling us things. We get a really good handle on what people are thinking based on those IRC conversations.
Yep.
So keep it up. And I'm also going to post the link to our outlines. So if there's something that you want us to talk about, you can add a comment onto the Google document and we'll talk about it.
Yep.
See you next week.